All right, welcome back, fellow jazz bums. Today we are speaking with Aidan Levy. We are so excited to have him here. He is the author of a recent Sonny Rollins biography, Saxophone Colossus, as well as other works. He is a notable music historian, and Felipe and I are just so excited and thrilled that he's here to chat with us. Before we get into it, remember to like and subscribe. We also have the Jazz Bums Discord, so you can come and hang out with us there. And then we also live stream on this channel every Friday. So subscribe to the channel to get notifications for when we go live. With that, I'm going to kick it over to Felipe to get us started.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Aidan. Today we have Aidan Levy. Aidan Levy, author, educator, writer. He wrote for many publications such as New York Times, The Village Voice, Jazz Times, The Nation, and many others. He was a former fellow of the Leon Levy Center for Biography. He just concluded his doctorate at Columbia University at the Department of English and Comparative Literature. And he's been an author of great books on Patti Smith, on Lou Reed, and most recently, he authored Saxophone Colossus, The Life and Music of Sonny Rollins. And here to talk about his career and, of course, Sonny Rollins and this colossal great book. We're going to spend the next hour here talking to him and learning as much as we can. Aidan, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you so much for being there, and hope we have a great conversation. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me.
That being said, before anything, first question that popped in my mind. I mean, we know of your body of work, things that you participated and worked. So, but for someone just out of the blue, Patti Smith, Lou Reed, why Sonny Rollins?
Well, I've always followed my heart when it comes to subjects that I write about. So I'm a big fan of Lou Reed. I love Patti Smith's music. Mm-hmm. And Sonny Rollins' music has been very important to me since I was about 11 years old. So I'm a saxophone player myself. Mm-hmm. And the first jazz album I ever bought with my own money was Saxophone Colossus. So I've been listening to, loving, and absorbing Sonny's music for my entire life at this point. And I started reading about Sonny at an early age, and then I saw the documentaries at one point. I got more and more interested, read all the books about Sonny, and I still wanted to know more. So at some point, it occurred to me that maybe I would try to write a book myself, thinking I would never actually do that. But I approached Sonny and his team about it, and to my surprise, they were not opposed. So 7 years later, the book came out. But the other thing I could say is that all the artists I've written on so far have had a very strong connection to New York City. Mm-hmm. And I lived in New York for more than a dozen years after college, and my family's all from the New York area. So yeah, I feel some affinity for New York artists.
Excellent. So, so you have the subject, Sonny Rollins. It sounds like you have his blessing. And one of the things when we were kind of diving in was around the process, your process, and what you had access to. So one of the questions Felipe and I were curious about is how did you approach this subject? Did you have any like preconceived notion about you obviously know the body of work, but like the breadth of detail that would be required for this effort? And then one thing that I'm just curious about is when you were given access to his archive, can you like talk us through what that is? Like, is it in his house? Can you help visualize what that experience is when you're kind of diving into the source material?
Sure. So at the outset of the project, I knew that Sonny Rollins is one of the most written about jazz artists of all time. So as well as one of the most prolific. So I knew that there would be so much to listen to, so much to read, so many books, articles, documentaries, etc., that it would be overwhelming. But it turned out to be so much more than I anticipated, easily by a factor of 5, maybe 10. And one of the reasons for that is the archive. So I did not have access to the archive when I began research on the book. I knew it would become available at some point. I didn't know when. And uh, when I first got in to that material, which is held at the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem, 2 blocks from where Sonny Rollins was born, I
Mhm.
was just blown away. It's staggering how much material he kept, how much he documented his own life. If you think about um, the rest of us, most people don't keep a journal diligently. They don't save all their business records. At least you're supposed to save your records for what, 7 years for tax purposes, and then you can kind of shred them. Well, Sonny saved everything after a certain point, and he held on to them. I mean, I'm sure that he realized it would be of some historical importance, at some point once he'd become a star of the music. But it was really thousands of pages of practice notes, journals, as I said, business records, correspondence. So all the letters he received, he held on to. I found
Wow.
many of the letters that he sent in other archives in this country and around the world. It just turned into this massive project of contending with, dealing with, just reveling in this archive. It's a way of telling a counter narrative to some of the official histories that had been written and that he knew would continue to be written. So it was just an unbelievable experience to immerse myself in
Yeah.
that archive and the thousands and thousands of pages. People have stories about going into the archive for a research project and expecting to find the Rosetta Stone, and they go and they open a folder and it's just one page from Encyclopedia Britannica or something like that. But this was the opposite of that. So some folders would take me a full day just to go through, and I mean just to scan. It could be
Yeah.
hundreds of pages in there to go through the entire archive, and I mean just to look and see what was there took me several months. So it was a years long process to get into the material, to start absorbing it and seeing what was there. Also, I said that maybe he had preserved his records for historical importance for posterity. Not
Mhm.
all of them, of course. That would be kind of crazy, unless
Right.
you were the president or something like that. So there were all these
Mhm.
journals in there where they weren't dated. It wasn't clear what was going on. So I would have to piece together that part of the narrative through context clues. He would write about a lunar eclipse taking place sometime in the early 60s, and that he was at the World's Fair, something like that. So I could triangulate from that and then place what was on that page in the context
Mhm.
of the narrative. But
Right.
yeah, I mean that's a little bit about the archive, and then there are other archives that I consulted, many others, for the duration of the project.
That is
Uh,
interesting. I heard that Lou Reed was very saved a lot of his stuff as well, right?
Yeah. So the Lou Reed
It's a good
Archive
question.
is also held at the New York Public Library in the Performing Arts Division. And I was unfortunately not able to consult any of that material for the book I did on Lou Reed, although I did use other archives. So if you're interested in going deep into the life of Lou Reed, you can check out my book, but I do strongly recommend Will Hermes' recent book, where he did have access to the archive, and it's fantastic. So, yeah.
so going back to Sonny Rollins, when you're kind of charting out the kind of larger trajectory of the book, are you doing it? I'm sure it's piecemeal, but it wouldn't be necessarily linear, is it? As you are uncovering things as people that you're interviewing speak about specific things that I'm sure you're able to point the direction, but you're probably also filling in pieces that maybe you were not expecting to, given how much material that you're dealing with. I was just curious about like that process and how you kind of put it all together.
Yeah, it's really a great question because it would be nice to conduct the research in a linear fashion and have
Yeah.
everything be streamlined in that way, and to have it all just go down as a kind of flawless first draft without having to revise extensively. And the biography is written in chronological form, so it would make sense in a way. But no, it's far from that. Uh, I things would come up. Uh, in anything but chronological order. Um, and because the archive processing kind of preserved its original order, there would sometimes be things from different years mixed in there, that kind of thing. That's not a problem. That's actually important to archival science. So I always had to make sure that I kept everything organized, everything sorted out. I didn't have as precise of a filing system as I wish I did, but I would have extensive notes files that were grouped chronologically, so that material that came up from different eras would be sorted properly. The interviews, that was another part of the research, another archive that I put together myself. Over 200 interviews that went into the book. I did not conduct them chapter by chapter. It was done when people were available to do them. I had a master list of people I wanted to
Right.
talk to, and then sometimes those interviews led to other interviews. Um, so yeah, the task of keeping it all organized is one of the most challenging ones for a biographer, and I can hardly imagine how somebody like Robert Caro, the Lyndon Johnson biographer, keeps track of everything, or how
Oh
you would
yeah.
do it
Yeah.
before.
Wasn't that like a multi-volume set of
Yeah,
like
it's
just
not it's not even
massive?
done yet. It's not even done yet.
Oh right.
So I didn't, I hope it is one day. But
Yeah. Master of the
anyway,
Senate, right? Is
right,
that
right.
is
Yep, yeah.
uh,
So I kept track of everything digitally, although I did have a lot of paper material. But in past generations, biographers would just have file cabinets. You could take up a whole floor of an office building with just material for an archive. When it came to writing the book, I did write it in order, actually.
oh right,
I
okay.
spent several years researching it, about 2 years just doing research,
Okay.
and then at that point I began writing, and I did write it in sequential order, so I didn't jump around in the timeline. And that kind of helped, I think, keep everything consistent in terms of what I already mentioned and avoid repeating
Mhm.
myself, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, and if there was any additional research that I needed to do during a chapter, I would either do that while I was writing it, or I would have to return to the chapter and then kind of interpolate
Mhm.
that section in there. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean that's kind of a short answer to this question about process. But
Mhm.
yeah, it's a lot to keep track of, and it's trying to bring a sense of order to the disparate experiences of someone's life and the disparate sources for and repositories for that material. So the idea is that when you actually read the book, it feels linear, but
Mhm.
that's not my experience of it. You know,
Mhm.
Oh,
going
for
into
sure.
research.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, but just for the ones who haven't seen it, here's the book. Saxophone
Yep.
Colossus. Comes to another question, Aidan. I think the first comment I made with Mike and Chris, who unfortunately could not be here, is how fantastic it feels. You talk about linearity. It feels like I'm watching a movie. It feels, especially when they're describing the Harlem, those early years. It's just so vivid, so detailed. You can pinpoint things that you're seeing there. It's just terrific.
Yeah.
And in that early years of Sonny's life, the impression I got, correct me if I'm wrong, is that he was very he was always trying to prove something. He didn't get into music school, and there was this thing about his father being military and always being like so disciplined. He always seemed to be, and later in his life, the bridge, the retirements and comebacks, he always seems to be trying to maybe prove something or reinvent himself. So, what do you think kind of built this character in him? Was this, I wouldn't even call it like obsession or something, but this perfectionism, was this military thing, was like the need to prove himself. What do you think built his character in that regard?
Well, I think it's a combination of nature and nurture. So, as you said, his father was a decorated military officer. He worked as a chief steward for the Navy for many years, and you can read all about that in the book. So, he had very high standards. According to reports I read, he was a polyglot, very high achieving. Um, and his mother, same thing. She would take night classes. She really believed in the value of education and self improvement. She was devoted to her family and to her children. She valued culture and exposed Sonny and his siblings to theater performances and music, film, all throughout their childhood. So I think that Sonny had it kind of in the blood to be high achieving, to be a bit of a perfectionist, but then it was reinforced along different lines within the culture. So on the one hand, you have his siblings being such high achievers, and his older brother was a successful violinist who was recruited by the Pittsburgh Symphony and then decided to turn them down and became a medical doctor instead. His sister, his older sister, was also very talented musician, and yeah, she kind of set that standard for him as well. And Sonny was the youngest, and just I think like many youngest siblings, sort of felt like he was growing up in the shadow of his older siblings, and he wanted to measure up to that standard. I think that his parents held him to a very high standard, and he grew up feeling like the black sheep of his family. In addition to that, jazz and particularly bebop um, was considered a pariah art form at the time that Sonny came into the world. Uh, Despite that fact, it still had widespread appreciation
Mhm.
among the the cognoscenti, the people who really knew what was going on. So Sonny, I think, grew up feeling at once that the art form was discriminated against, that it was disrespected, but at the same time that there were these other standards being set by his heroes like Charlie Parker, Lester Young, Coleman Hawkins, Bud Powell, Billie Holiday. These are all people that he came into contact with and knew quite well. Miles Davis, he met when he was a teenager. So he always felt like he wasn't quite measuring up to that standard. And to Sonny, though, I think that that was ultimately a good thing because
Mhm.
it kept him passionate about pursuing uh, his own artistic project, about bettering his own sense of self-expression. And he has felt for his entire life that he did not ever quite meet the standards set by Charlie Parker, but I would say that he absolutely did.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I just feel like when I was reading his bio in the early years, who influenced him, and then how he was able to collaborate with some of these folks, and not even just collaborate, but I think there was a point in here where you write that on this, I think it's the Sounds of Sunny, which is a Riverside recording. He has a solo. There's a solo song that he does on it, and that harkens back to, I think, Coleman Hawkins has a song called Picasso that was, I guess, on 78, and that was like that direct connection there, like that awareness of one of his idols, and him thinking that and taking that and doing that on his own. And I think even when that's mentioned in the book, you write that that is like a solo recording is like the highest expression of art. Is kind of like how he was thinking about it. Is that correct? Does that ring true? Am I interpreting that understanding correctly?
Well, I mean, to some extent, like I don't know if he would say that that's the end all be all, but there was a
Okay.
time when he felt that doing a solo performance
Yeah.
was a pinnacle of achievement that
Okay.
he
That's it. Yeah.
sought to. He wanted to kind of climb that mountain. He wanted to be like the Andre Segovia of the saxophone, and
That's it. Yeah.
for
Yeah.
jazz saxophone.
Yeah.
So, as you said, Coleman Hawkins had done this. Sonny had done this going back to his youth when he couldn't find a place to practice, so he'd practice in the closet. So it kind of
Mhm.
went back to that early experimentation,
Mhm.
and then putting a tenor saxophone reed on the alto saxophone, seeing what kind of sound that would make. But the idea was, how could you develop a theme and maintain compositional form and structure on a single line instrument like the saxophone without any harmony, without that harmonic foundation established by the bass, piano,
Mhm.
the rhythm of the drums? How could you imply all those things with just the single line?
Mhm.
You can think of successors to this legacy, Anthony Braxton recording for alto. There have been many people who have worked
Yeah.
in a solo form, but Sonny wanted to do that starting from an early age. He was quoted in interviews in the 50s saying that's what he's trying to achieve. It's
Mhm.
not in place of working with a group. It was just something that he wanted to do in addition to that. So he gave a series of solo performances in various places. He did one at the um, Museum of Modern Art that was
Yes.
released as the solo
Yeah.
concert in the
Yeah.
80s.
Yep.
Um, I asked him about that album because I really like it, although it's
Yeah.
polarizing. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you what he said. Um, he actually said he doesn't like the album because he was having dental issues at the time,
All
and
right.
it was just tough for him to get it out on that day. Um, and we could talk more about dentistry and jazz because that is a whole other aspect of the book. Um, but there was this one concert that Sonny gave, a solo concert at the Greek Theater in Berkeley, California, that everybody who was there felt like it was this cathartic, life changing experience. And it came up in interviews several times. Everybody who wrote about it said that this was just an unbelievable performance. It was part of a festival that had some major artists involved. I think Nina Simone was also there, and everybody just said Sonny Rollins stole the show. David Murray, the tenor saxophonist, was there. I think he was 14 years old at the time,
Ooh,
and
fantastic.
he decided to switch from alto to tenor saxophone
All
based on
right.
what he saw that
Mhm.
night, and kind of committed to the life of a jazz musician from then on. I believe Michael Wolff, the pianist who later worked with Sonny, was present for that performance. So that was another solo concert, and it was done at the time of the space race. So some of the reviews written
Okay.
about it said, Sonny Rollins also had his own moonshot, and he got there first.
Yeah. That's amazing.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. Yeah, no, that's certainly go back to that part. But moving a little further, during his development, Aiden, I also, to me, two crucial moments in his career, and I'd like to elaborate more on those. His time in Chicago, and the little some of his contact with gospel music, and then of course playing with the Clifford Brown Max Roach Quintet, which I think was sort of traumatic in a sense for him, but also very he helped him grow a lot and develop. To me, it felt like that's the moment when he became like this sideman, and then after that, he really started to become like Sonny Rollins, the big guy, the Colossus, the greatest. And yeah, just like you elaborate a little more on those periods because they seem to be like career defining moments for me.
Yeah, thanks for that question because it sounds almost like a two-parter or maybe even a three-parter that may not be related, but they're inextricably linked, actually, to go from his time in Chicago, his involvement with gospel, to his relationship with the Max Roach Clifford Brown Quintet. Um, so, yeah, I'll start with Chicago. Sonny Rollins has always thought of Chicago as his second home. He came there in the early 50s, uh, just with the Babs Gonzalez group. Babs Gonzalez was a
Mhm.
uh, bebop singer, early developer of scat, um, and he took Sonny there, and uh, well, he gave Sonny an opportunity to go to Chicago. Really, he actually came down by way of Canada. He hitchhiked to Chicago, and when he got to Chicago, he discovered this cornucopia of music, and there weren't strict lines of division between the genres. So all the musicians would play every kind of gig imaginable. They'd be doing blues, they might be doing gospel, they'd be playing uh, bop gigs with big bands. He performed with Sun Ra's group. He played and he did some burlesque performances in kind of the red light district. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, in Calumet City. Um, and he got to meet some unbelievable musicians. Maybe the most interesting of them to me was a drummer named Ike Day.
Yeah.
And I discuss Ike Day in the book. Everybody who ever heard Ike Day said that he was the greatest drummer of all time.
Yeah.
Um, so, yeah, Max Roach just found what he was doing to be otherworldly. But you can't hear him on any recordings. He recorded on only a few albums, and the mix is so bad that you can't really hear the drums. It's all but inaudible. But so we'll just have to take everyone's word for it that Ike Day was so influential. And Sonny played in his group for a time. Um, when he met Ike Day in Chicago, that became a strong influence on Sonny Rollins. Um, but it was in Chicago that he got involved with gospel. Now that kind of went back to his roots. His grandmother had taken him to Mother Horn's church in Harlem to hear the music there and to kind of get with the spirit and experience the sanctified church. But in Chicago, he ended up getting to know a prominent gospel family through the Church of God in Christ, which is usually an acronym. Um, and they're called the Gay Family. They're still active in the gospel community. I talked to the Reverend um, Pastor, yeah, Donald Gay, um, not too long ago. He's still active and I think still singing, as I understand it. But everyone in the family performed, um, and Sonny fell in love with one of the sisters, Geraldine Gay, who some people thought of as the Errol Garner of gospel, and he became very close with uh, one of the brothers in the family that was kind of thought of as the prodigal son, Robert Gay, who was a trumpeter, bebop trumpeter. Uh, and they invited Sonny into their home and kind of during a very difficult period for him. And yeah, that support was kind of meant the world to him. Um, so it was also in Chicago that he got involved with the Max Roach Clifford Brown Quintet. Um, when he was in Chicago for a long while, he was living in the YMCA, and he'd come out of rehab and he holed up in the Y with his saxophone, a lot of cans of tomato juice, and basically just committed to a monastic lifestyle in order to focus on his music, clean living, and his kind of spiritual existence in the world. But at some point, he decided he felt that he was strong enough to go back into the clubs and that he would be able to resist any temptations that he found there. And it so happened that the Clifford Brown Max Roach Quintet was in the middle of a record breaking residency at the Beehive Club, which is a storied club in Chicago.
Yeah.
And they were looking for a new saxophone player. Their tenor saxophonist, Harold Land, had to go back to California to deal with some health issues in the family, and they were auditioning people. So they came, Clifford Brown and Max Roach. Maybe it was just Max Roach. You'll have to, I can't remember whether it was Clifford Brown and Max Roach both came. But anyway, they came to the Y, and they wanted to, Sonny was available, and he said he could come and do that. So he came by for his kind of audition, and well, I mean, kind of the rest is history from there. But maybe what's interesting about this is that he had another offer to join the Miles Davis Quintet, which later became known as the First Great Quintet. And Miles thought that it was an offer Sonny could not refuse, so much so that he was already quoted in Downbeat as saying that Sonny had joined the group. And there were, according to some reports and some people I talked to, marquees at Miles Davis performances that listed Sonny Rollins' name. And when people showed up for the performance, they were kind of upset to discover that it was a different tenor saxophonist they didn't recognize. Of course, that was John Coltrane. But yeah, so one of the reasons why Sonny did go with Clifford Brown and Max Roach was because they were making some of the greatest music ever made. But another reason was that they were known for a clean lifestyle.
Yes, I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
So that was a big part of it. Miles Davis at the time, not so much. So yeah, he went with Clifford Brown and Max Roach. It gave him this opportunity to see and confirm that life could be lived differently than he had been living it on the jazz scene. And it also gave him an opportunity to branch out compositionally, to really hone his chops as an improviser, as a performer. If you think of Valse Hot, the great waltz composition that Sonny wrote while he was in that group, that's a product of his work with Max Roach and Clifford Brown, and the idea of experimenting with different time signatures beyond music that could be done in two. And so they did jazz in 3/4 time. Sonny was a part of developing that and pushing that forward. Yeah, I mean, I think that his work with Clifford Brown, Max Roach Quintet is really some of the best playing he ever did, and it's such a tragedy that what happened with Clifford Brown and Richie Powell and Richie Powell's wife, had they not died in that car accident, I mean, we can only imagine what kind of music they would have made. It was only about 6 months that Sonny was in that group with Clifford Brown and Richie Powell. So I mean, they really left a lifetime of music behind, though.
Yeah. And there's some great documents. There's that Prestige one with Sonny Rollins +4. And then they have the one at Basin Street, which is actually a studio album, even though it sounds like it's a live album from the title.
Right.
But there are moments in your book, like there's a chapter dedicated to Clifford Brown. I think it's I Remember Clifford or something like that, which is like a common title. It's the name of a song, I'm pretty sure, that a lot of people cover. And there are moments in this book that, and then also towards the end, that are just absolutely excruciating to go through and think. Like when you're documenting how, as the day progresses, he has to tell people what happened, and just thinking about how he just has to continue to revisit this tragic event, and it just is, I don't know, it just really a huge, you could tell how much this impacted him. I mean, obviously, but it just really comes to life in that chapter, and it's really tough. And I've heard him. He was interviewed on camera. It may have been, there's a documentary called Brownie Speaks on Clifford Brown, and I think he was interviewed, and he, you could tell that that was such a not, apex isn't the right word, but just a key point in his life where it really kind of disrupted everything and changed the trajectory of everything.
Yeah, I mean, everyone in that group and in the jazz community at large, was just so shaken by that tragedy. Um, so yeah, in the chapter, I go through almost a play-by-play of what happened, in part because Max Roach also kept all of his records. So in the Max Roach archive at the Library of Congress, you can find all of the toll receipts from
Yeah,
the tours that they were on, and to see how many hours and miles they were logging on the road. But yeah, it was really catastrophic. That
yeah,
song, I Remember Clifford, was written by Benny Golson,
yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
pay tribute to Clifford Brown. And incidentally, Benny Golson and Sonny Rollins are the only two remaining subjects
Mhm,
of A Great Day in Harlem, that photograph from 1958.
Mhm.
Um,
mhm.
so yeah, it definitely really affected Sonny and Max Roach. I can tell you that what happened there was that on May 22nd, um, on yeah, on June 22nd, sorry, they recorded Saxophone Colossus, uh, um, and they had split up. Clifford Brown and Richie Powell decided to go back and visit their families, and Max Roach and Sonny came to New York, um, to kind of see their people, and then also to make that album. The accident happened on June 26th. So that's, I think, one of the reasons why Sonny's memory of recording
Mm,
Saxophone Colossus is a little bit
yeah,
blurred, because I think it was overshadowed by what happened only a few days later.
yeah,
Um, so yeah, I mean, it's that was kind of one of the goals for this book, was to put the lives of these artists in context beyond the discography. Uh,
mhm,
Mhm.
so that you would have that, but then also everything else that was going on with them. So we can kind of think of something like Saxophone Colossus as this totemic art object, and that it is. But uh, it has these other shades of meaning for Sonny as well. That it was recorded
yeah.
less than a week before the deaths of Clifford Brown and Richie
Mhm.
Powell.
I think in the book you mentioned that it was possible that there could have been other, like Max could have been in the car too. Is that, am I remembering that correctly? Like there was a potential that other people could have been
Well, I
just
mean,
as,
yeah, like it could have happened.
yeah.
You know, there were various instances when,
Okay.
so I mean, they were just, and I really go into it in the book, just how many uh, one-nighters they did, um,
Yeah.
meaning how
Mhm.
many shows they played where they would just be in Cleveland and then they would go on to the next city. They were just living out of suitcases, and they were usually driving along the circuit. Uh,
Mhm.
and I interviewed Terry Gibbs, the great vibraphonist, who's still alive. and he was talking about occasionally meeting the Max Roach Clifford Brown quintet on the road, like two ships passing in the night. And they would always, he said they met at least once, but maybe more than that. It sounds like
Yeah.
they would go to a Howard Johnson's, and Howard
I
Johnson's
didn't-
was now I guess it's a hotel chain, but it was a restaurant chain, and a big restaurant chain. So yeah, they would meet there, maybe have like fried oysters or whatever, and just tell stories from the road.
And Terry Gibbs, I think, was a label mate. I think he recorded for MRC
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, that's
So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty cool. Yeah. All right. So I think we also want to ask about his career when he works with Orrin Keep News again, but for Milestone. He has a number of recordings there, including the one you mentioned, that solo concert, which there's a great quote in this book that Sonny gives, and we don't have to go there right now, but I just wanted to set it up because he talks about how in that solo concert, how he's putting this music out there, like into the universe. I don't think he uses that term exactly, and that it'll live forever. And there's so many dimensions that we're not going to be able to get to everything, but politically he's on the edge. Spirituality wise, he's there. Like he's multifaceted, like us all, and complicated like us all, but he really allows that to take his music in different places. But for his milestone years, where I guess he starts in his late 40s there, I want to say, into his 50s. Can you tell us a little bit about that time of his career?
Yeah. So he signs with Milestone in his early 40s.
Early 40s.
Actually,
Okay.
yeah. It feels like it would be his late 40s because it seemed like he'd lived already 2 lifetimes by the time he signed with Miles. He was already kind of like an elder statesman of the music by the time he signed with Milestone, but he was really only 41 or 42. So yeah, Orrin Keep News courted Sonny, and Sonny agreed to sign with Milestone, under the condition that he had total control over his artistic output. And very soon after he signed with Milestone, he decided to work exclusively with his wife and manager, Lucille, to produce all of those albums. And they usually only had a one album contract, which would be kind of re-signed after every album. And yeah, it was a very flexible arrangement, and it allowed Sonny to do whatever he wanted to do in the studio. I don't think Sonny was ever happy with the results. He was always his own worst critic. And I also think that many times what was laid down in the studio was then honed on the road. And that's kind of the model that he adopted at some point. That they would record an album. I mean, it wasn't always in that way. Sometimes they would be on the road prior to making the album. But when I listened to tapes from live performances for my research, I did oftentimes find that some of the strongest renditions of songs from those albums would take place on the road after the album was recorded. This was made possible through an archivist and collector named Carl Smith, who lives in Maine and is the co-founder of a hi-fi company that deals solely in cables for hi-fi systems. And he's one of the world's greatest Sonny Rollins fans and Bud Powell fans, and just a huge music lover. And starting around the year 2000, he decided to collect as many live tapes of Sonny Rollins as he possibly could, because he wanted to show the world Sonny's greatness in the live setting. So I got in touch with Carl, and Carl generously agreed to loan me the entire collection for the duration of my research. So that's kind of how I
Wow.
was able to hear many of those recordings going all the way back to the early 1950s. Um,
Okay.
those recordings also formed the beginning of the Roadshow series. That's the series of there's a
Oh yeah.
compilation
Yeah.
albums
Yeah.
made
I've heard
from live
those.
recordings. Um, so that and the 9/11 concert, which won Sonny a Grammy, the 9/11 concert was recorded by Carl um, using his own um, kind of microphones that he developed to make
Wow.
a live recording surreptitiously in a concert
Wow.
hall. And just as a bit of luck, he ended up sitting in front of the speaker system. So the sound that he got was directly from the instruments.
Okay.
So that's that the recording quality on the 9/11 concert is just superb. But yeah, the milestone years I think have been neglected and kind of dismissed by many critics, and that's because they're uneven. Um, so that's one of the reasons why they released a retrospective album called Silver City at one point that was handpicked by the eminent critic Gary Giddens, just to show some of Sonny's best work from the Milestone catalog. Um, so yeah, if you haven't heard that one, I would check that out. Um,
Cool.
Don't Stop the Carnival, which is a live album, I think is also just it's got some real high points. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I have most of the '70s of his work, and I truly like those records. They great work in there, and also his last record on Prestige on Impulse. Sorry, his Impulse series are quite interesting. Alfie was quite a successful record. Sonny Rollins on Impulse, but especially his most experimental one. That was, I think, the last that he put on Impulse with the folks that are playing with Coltrane, right? Freddie Hubbard, Elvin Jones. They
Jimmy
play with
Page.
him there,
Yep. Hmm.
and that's a fantastic, terrific record that doesn't get cited as often. So and Coltrane being, I don't believe that close, but really good friends with Coltrane. They worked together in the past. The tenor Man's story, like Coltrane sleeping in the car, I found fantastic. But how much, how was their interplay between it in terms of like one influencing the other, like directly or indirectly? How do you see that?
It was strong. So there was this perceived rivalry between John Coltrane and Sonny Rollins always, and much of that was exaggerated by the press. But it really couldn't be farther from the truth. There was no animosity between them. They were like brothers, and they would see each other quite a bit. They would talk on the phone constantly. I interviewed a saxophonist named Sonny Simmons, and he said at one point he was practicing with Sonny Rollins, and Coltrane called, and they were just kind of on the phone with each other for hours. They would talk about spiritual matters. They were both very committed to Eastern philosophy. They had an informal book club together. Um, Sonny recommended that Coltrane read Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramahansa Yogananda. Coltrane recommended a book called Mysticism of Sound and Music by Hazrat Inayat Khan. There was other material that they shared. They both were uh, eager to go to India, and Sonny finally went there after Coltrane's passing. Um, but yeah, how did they influence each other? Well, they pushed each other forward. Um, they were kind of going in different directions, and Sonny once said that he thought young saxophone players would do better to follow Coltrane than to follow him, and the reason for that was that Coltrane had what you might think of as a more um, vertical style of playing, like more arpeggios, that kind of thing. Sonny felt that his improvisatory style was more lyrical, that it would be harder to emulate. Um, I mean, I think that's one of the reasons why there are so many saxophonists who were branded John Coltrane clones, but not as many that were thought of as kind of like Rollins imitators. But and that's not to take anything away from Coltrane or Rollins. This is just really a comment Sonny made. He took so much from Coltrane, and I know that Coltrane took so much from Sonny Rollins. They were both quoted in interviews saying the same, but they really felt it. So yeah, something that Sonny kept in his archive, just to bring it back to that, was a lyric sheet from A Love Supreme that was given to Sonny by Coltrane's wife Naima after his passing. So I found there was a page of a notebook where Sonny had just written Coltrane's name over and over again. But yeah, they were so close, and I think it really affected Sonny when Coltrane passed at such a young age.
Yeah, I've heard stories that there, you just dispelled it, but that there was some rivalry. That's why Sonny Rollins went and kind of took an early sabbatical, did the bridge, and it was because John Coltrane really seemed to elevate, I guess, his playing, and that Sonny didn't feel like he was ready to be in public until he was able to do something of that level on his side. But I guess that still can be a friendly, rivalry.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really think that was quite the case. And even when Sonny did
Okay.
return from his sabbatical on the Williamsburg Bridge, he still didn't really feel like he'd reached the level he was hoping to achieve.
Mhm.
It wasn't like some people would say, oh, like Coltrane threw Sonny under the bridge. No, it really wasn't that way. There were many factors involved there, but a big part of it was really just that Sonny Rollins in 1959 was considered the leading tenor saxophonist of his generation, and he himself didn't believe the hype. He had the opportunity to step back from touring and recording and being a public figure because his wife had a steady job and their rent was low. So he was able to just go in and work on himself, on his mental, spiritual, physical health, and to work on his technique so that he felt more confident being able to articulate the ideas he wanted to express on the instrument.
Mhm.
But yeah, like, so one thing I wanted to make clear in the book was how uh, frenetic the life of a touring musician was during that era. Uh, that there was really no time to process anything that was happening. Uh, so I think that Sonny had an extremely frantic, hectic decade throughout the 50s. And in 1959, I think just took the first opportunity to step back from the scene, which is something that he started speaking about in 1958, which was really prior to Coltrane's ascendancy. So I know it sounds like, um, the lady does protest too much, methinks, but
Yeah.
it it was a fact. The point is, it was a factor, that Coltrane was coming up, but it wasn't the sole reason, and it was, if anything, more positive than a negative thing, that Sonny stepped back.
Yeah.
It was kind of similar. I think of it as kind of uh, setting a precedent for other public figures like Naomi Osaka in tennis, or Simone Biles stepping back from professional competition in gymnastics and then coming
Mhm.
back and winning gold in the Olympics. I think that's
There you
kind of
go.
what's going on with Sonny.
And is it when Coltrane was composing Love Supreme, didn't he kind of lock himself in like the attic? I think is the story
Yeah, I mean,
where.
Coltrane definitely could be reclusive. Um,
Mhm.
so Sonny was somebody who always was close to him. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I did want to ask about it's kind of a two-part question, but related. I know that Sonny had, and I think he speaks to this, where he, had the great fortune to live a great life, that he got to meet a lot of his heroes and work with them. And I think he passes that on to the next generation as well. Can you speak a little bit about the, how he was treated by the generation before him, and how he tries to, accommodate the new generation coming?
Yeah. So Sonny grew up um, idolizing his musical heroes, but he also got to meet many of them. Uh, so Coleman Hawkins, he heard on jukeboxes in Harlem after Body and Soul came out in 1939. And Sonny took a glossy headshot of Hawkins down to Hawkins' apartment, which is right in the neighborhood, and waited for him to come home. Hawkins signed it, not realizing that they'd meet again in a recording studio at RCA Studios 20 years later. He got to know Lester Young. He might see Illinois Jacquette walking around. Mary Lou Williams was right in the neighborhood. He met Bud Powell. He got to work with Bud Powell. He got to practice with Bud Powell. He got to learn from Bud Powell. Charlie Parker was really maybe the key figure. But Sonny got very close with Bird. He showed up at Denzel Best's apartment once and tried to get his autograph, but he came a little bit too early, and I think it kind of upset a jazz musician who was out all night. He had all these stories of just being an ardent fan of the music, of kind of going to getting an informal college education at the Apollo Theater right in Harlem. So when he became a star of the music in his own right, he felt the weight of responsibility to pass the torch to the next generation. And later on in his career, he started inviting younger artists to play with him at Carnegie Hall. So he worked with Wynton Marsalis, Branford Marsalis. He had Roy Hargrove come and play with him, Terence Blanchard. Um, and I was able to interview as many of these folks as I could. Christian McBride was another one. And there were multiple generations too. Archie Shepp spoke about how meaningful it was to share a stage with Sonny Rollins one time. And I think that this idea of continuum is central to Sonny Rollins' legacy. Um, I know that currently he's been supporting the tenor saxophonist James Brandon Lewis, who I think of as
We
one of
love
the
him.
one of the heirs to Sonny Rollins'
Absolutely. Yep.
legacy. And James Brandon Lewis was at the Newport Jazz Festival last weekend, and I couldn't help but think of Sonny there in 1958 when
Oh,
they were
yeah.
making Jazz on a Summer's Day. Somehow that Sonny was cut out of the final film. But anyway, yeah, I mean, he continues to have an ear out for the next generation, and it's always been an important part of his life, but also to perpetuating this thing that we call jazz.
Anything else, Mike? I like to ask. So, yeah, I mean, you're talking about his legacy. I was wondering during your research or even recently, I mean, how was your interaction with him the last time you had the chance to talk to him? And how was that?
We spoke many times for the book. Um, and after I finished the first draft of the manuscript, which was about twice as long as the finished published version,
Mhm.
I sent it to him in this binder. It was the thickest binder I could find at Office Depot. And, um, I guess he maybe started to read it a little bit. Uh, some people had already read it. He had very few corrections, but there was one point where I think I identified um, all of these Western stars or Western characters as being part of radio, but it turned out that they were movies or something like that. And no one else had caught this. So it was good that Sonny had read that part of it. But he said, I'm not going to read all of this. And this is somebody who's known as being his own worst critic, so self-critical. It was excruciating for him to listen to playback of a studio recording. So I think reading a play-by-play of his life in this way would be similarly excruciating in some ways, even though I think, I think that I've it's a sympathetic account of Sonny's life. I think for him having lived it, it might be hard to read. But anyway, I had the sense that he maybe still wanted to participate after that draft was submitted. So I said, Sonny, I understand you may not want to read the whole manuscript, but how about this? I'll kind of walk you through it. We can just have a series of conversations and just go through the entire book. And he said, that would be great, actually. So we had, I don't want to say maybe 10 or 12 conversations where we just talked through everything that was in the book. Each conversation, I would say, was about 3 hours long. And one of the surprising parts of this was that I don't recall either of us ever having a bathroom break in the middle of the conversation. But anyway, it was really meaningful to me that he took the time to do that. So I then incorporated those conversations into the final draft of the manuscript. But let's see, since the book came out, we've stayed in touch to some extent. But anytime I've spoken to him, we usually talk about spiritual matters, the importance of living by the golden rule. And he always wants to get an update on my cat, whose name is Sonny. But incidentally, it's not named for Sonny Rollins, and his name is spelled with a U. He's an orange tabby. And the story behind that is I was taking a walk with my wife one day, and we saw this stray cat. And we had a cat at the time, and we tried to feed him because he looked really hungry, but he kind of ran away. And then months later, our cat passed, and we were at a rescue. And I saw this orange tabby, and I turned to my wife and I said, "That's the cat we saw." She said, "You're nuts. No, there's no way that's the cat." And later that night, he said, "Oh my God, you're right. That was the cat." And we went back the next day and we said, "Yeah, we know this cat. Does the cat have a name?" They said, "Oh yeah, it's Sonny." So we said, "Oh well, we have to have him."
That's fantastic.
And then I'll just say this one more thing about it. That
Okay.
once Sonny asked, how's my little guy doing? And I said, "Oh, Sonny's doing well, but I've seen that he seems to have lost some of his teeth. And you can't take a cat to a dentist, and we can't keep him inside. He just won't stop going out there. He's an outdoor cat." And Sonny said, "I feel the same way as Sonny. I've lost a lot of my teeth too, but I'm still going out there."
All right. Well, Aidan, thank you for coming in and chatting with us. Just want to show and plug the book one more time. This is Saxophone Colossus. It is a key reference book. I think it belongs in any jazz collector's collection. It's an exceptional resource that touches on Sonny's history, also jazz history, recorded music history. There's points where you talk about how the LP format's just coming out and him and Miles Davis are working on Dig up until, these past few years where Sonny's up in, I think he's in Woodstock now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And he's up in Woodstock and everything in between, all the different clubs, all the different characters, like you mentioned, there was over 200 interviews, access to his archive. It's just an incredible document. And the fact that you were able to speak with him and talk him through the book to get kind of one final pass and get his blessing and then also some additional information. I mean, it is such a well and thorough, complete story of this great artist. So this is definitely one to check out.
Mhm.
Oh, well, thank you. No, I really appreciate it, and thanks for everything you've done to support the music.
Yeah. Well, we'll be following your career. And if do you have any? Are you working on anything now? Is there any new subjects that you're starting on?
Nothing I can announce yet.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, I'm in a kind of preliminary stages on a few different
Okay.
projects.
All right. Well, we'll be paying attention, and if
For
if it's
sure.
jazz focus, we'll definitely be reaching back out.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, Aidan.
Thanks so much for
All
your
right.
time, Aidan. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks again.
Thank you.
See ya.
Thank you.
Bye.